Hey there, everybody. How you doing today? Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to get right into it. My favorite, one of the verses that I like from yesterday's reading, is from Luke 18, verse 27, where Jesus says, "What is impossible for man or with man is possible with God." He was talking about how hard it was for the rich to enter into the kingdom of God. It's hard to give up a lot of that stuff. And somebody asked him in the crowd, "Well, who then can be saved?" And that's when Jesus responds, "What's impossible for man is possible for God." So it's talking about our salvation, of course. We can't save ourselves. There's nothing that we can do to earn our way to heaven. God's got to provide that through His grace. But it also is a really good verse, just simply trusting God that sometimes when we can't do something on our own, that He can come through for us and help us get through that. So great verse to put on your refrigerator. My refrigerator verses. All right, we're reading Psalms 25 through 27 today, and also Luke 19 through 20. Just kind of a brief overview of got something on my shirt there. Psalms 25 verse 27. Excuse me, Psalms 25 through 27. It's in this next group of psalms that are written, about 9 of them. They really have a high concentration of the person David writing, asking God for mercy and to respond. And then it's followed by a profession of trusting God, ending in appeals and celebration of God's faithful love to them. So these next few kind of all sound similar. They highlight God's character traits. It's a person that seems kind of hurting or desperate, or it could be that he's sick, it could be that his enemies are at his doorsteps, but he's crying out to God and he's reminding himself of all the character traits of God, kind of pumping him up a little bit, giving him courage, and then he focuses on that unbelievable love that God, that covenant love that He has for His people. So some really good sections in there. Psalms 27:14 says, and I think it kind of sums up this attitude: "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." And he's going through some tough stuff, not feeling well, worried about his enemies coming in. Wait on the Lord, trust in the Lord, and He'll get you through. So that's Psalms 25, 26, and 27, similar. And then we get into Luke 19 and Luke 20. There's lots of stuff in these texts, and I can't cover all of them. There's some that you're going to have a lot of questions about. I can't cover all of them. I wish I could. I try to keep this brief unless you want to sit here for an hour, which I don't think you don't. And so let me highlight a couple. In Luke 19, there's the story of Zacchaeus, one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. That means that he was probably overseeing a district or a region, and that means he had people underneath him, which means that he was very, very rich. And he worked in the Jericho region, and Jericho at that time was very, very prosperous. A beautiful city, laid out, spread out, kind of like a, I'm not going to say suburb, but it was just a nice place to live, and a lot of wealth was there. So I bet you he collected a lot of taxes and made a lot of money. It says that he was very, very rich. It also mentions that he's short, maybe for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was short, and so you mentioned that. Maybe he was unusually short. Short person in that area would be under 5 foot, uh, something like that. That would make him unusual in that area. But it could be that it's just a person that's passed over, and maybe that's why Luke includes that, describes that. By the way, Luke is really good. He's a doctor, and he always does, when he describes things, he always uses different ways of, he gives you more detail. So it's not just a person, but it's a short person. It's not just an illness, it's this kind of illness. So he was really good at giving details. All right, so he's short, and he really wanted to see Jesus, and so he climbs a sycamore tree. Now, a sycamore tree in that area, different from what we have in the United States, but in that area, they were very much like fig trees with the limbs that reach down low, and you can almost climb them like a ladder. So it was really easy to get up on one of those trees to go see. Now, he says he really wanted to see Jesus. Now, climbing a tree with his position and power would have been would have been undignified for that person. But evidently, he really wanted to see Jesus badly, and so he was willing to embarrass himself. And so after Jesus is done, he comes and he walks by. We kind of know the story. And he looks up and he sees Zacchaeus in a tree and invites himself over for dinner. You ever had anybody invite themselves over? Well, you'd let Jesus do that, and that's what he did. When you had a meal with somebody else in that culture, that meant you accepted them. And when you were welcomed into your home, that meant you were accepted. Jesus accepted this sinful person. Now, some of the religious authorities and some of the other people saw that and noticed that, and again they gasped and they say, doesn't Jesus know who he's going to be eaten with? And oh my goodness, he's over at his house. That house is probably filled with ceremonially unclean things. That food probably wasn't blessed right. That dishes weren't washed right, and it gives a Pharisee an anxiety attack because of how bad it might have been in that room. But Jesus doesn't bother Jesus at all. And then we see Zacchaeus' response as he gives his life to the Lord. Could have been before, could have been after, but all of a sudden we see the results of that. He says, I'm going to give away half of what I've taken and give it to the poor. And if I've cheated someone, I'm going to pay them 4 times as much back. Now, normally, if you cheated someone or took something, you were to pay 20% above the value of that. Now, if you took an animal from somebody, you were supposed to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. And so this is a lot amount. This is a generous amount. But that's how the Lord transformed his heart, and he wanted to do that. In this passage, in Luke 19:10, Jesus said, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. This is another one of those persons that was rejected by that culture at that time, and Jesus reached out to him and welcomed him into the family of God. Some say that Luke 19:10 is the theme verse for all of Luke, because Luke talks a lot about Jesus spending time with sinners. And it's fitting that Jesus' ministry is kind of hitting a climax here, because from this point on, he's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's not going to come back. And so he's kind of finishing up the ministry aspect of it. He's going to spend some time in Jerusalem doing some things, but it kind of gives us the taste of ultimately what he came to do, is to come to reach sinners. I really find that it's really cool. You know what Zacchaeus' name means? It means clean or pure. Now here was a person that was living a sinful life, but Jesus made him clean and pure. He was making him who he was meant to be, Zacchaeus, the pure one. So I really like that story. Anyways, you're going to read a number of stories coming up. You're going to read the parable of the 10 minas that talks about Jesus identifying with King Herod, and some of the pushback he got for becoming a king. And then you see him entering into celebrating Palm Sunday. We're going to read about that, and then some other stories that happened as he's in Jerusalem, kind of working his way towards his crucifixion. So hope you have a good time reading. Hope those a few little insights that give you something exciting to think about this week. Bless you, everybody. We'll talk with you tomorrow, okay?